welcome back to my channel. I hope that you're doing well. Welcome to another video and welcome to my best books of 2022. Today I'm going to be discussing the best books that I read in the year of 2022, as well as the most surprising books. The reason why I decided to combine them into one video is the list of surprising books that I have is very small compared to my best books of the year, so I just didn't think a whole video dedicated to surprising books was worth the time. So hopefully you don't mind that they're combined. I'm just going to quickly talk about my most surprising books first, just because it's a smaller section and quick to get through. But of course, I will leave timestamps in the description box below if you guys want to skip ahead and just go straight to my best books of 2022. But I have a lot of books to talk about, and I want to go into some detail about why I love these books so much, so I'm going to go ahead and get right into it. So without further ado, let's talk about my most surprising books of 2022. So these are in no particular order the entire video. I did not order any of these books because it was just too hard for me, but I do want to talk about the ones that I don't own first so I don't forget about them. So the first book that I'm going to talk about that surprised the hell out of me was King of Libertines by Pam Godwin. Now the reason why this book surprised me was because it is a historical fiction book set on the sea. Now, in my experience, I haven't really loved books set at sea. I just haven't found one that I've absolutely loved. And I am not really a historical fiction person. And then reading about pirates isn't usually something that I really love. So those three things combined into a book, I was really surprised that I actually ended up really loving this novella. This is the novella that comes before Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin, which is very, very hyped up and very well talked about, both on BookTube and on Book Talk. So it was definitely one that I was really excited for. But when I saw that there was a prequel novella, I decided to read it. And honestly, I was just shocked by it. I had so much fun with it. It was quick, it was fast paced, but the characters were also really entertaining, even though it did feel like we were set in the past. It didn't overwhelmingly take over the story, and I ended up really enjoying that one. The next one we're going to talk about is Broken Bonds by J. Bree. This is a book that I really, really enjoyed. I actually read books all the way up to book 4 in the series because book 5 and 6 didn't have an audiobook yet, but besides the point, I had read a book by J. Bree in the past, Just Drop Out. It was also a reverse harem set in the contemporary world, but this one I just didn't like at all. I didn't find it to be compelling. I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the bully aspect of this reverse harem, which didn't have any reverse harem aspects in the first book, and I was just very underwhelmed by the book. But I decided to give this author a second chance with this paranormal romance, and I ended up really, really liking it. I don't know if this is technically considered an Omegaverse book, but I just ended up really liking it. It's reverse harem. It is paranormal. The main character is unhinged, to say the least, because she has a bond inside of her that likes to take control, and that bond is just absolutely wild. But I just really enjoyed it. It wasn't the best reverse harem that I've ever read, but it was fun, it was gripping, and I had a good time with the story and the cliffhangers on every single book, which is absolutely insane. So I'm really glad that I liked this one, even though I didn't end up loving the author's previous work. And the last one that we're going to talk about that I don't own is Scream for Us by Molly Doyle. This is a novella that I read for Halloween. It is a very dark, very interesting Halloween smutty novella. And when I say this book is unhinged, I mean unhinged. There are a ton of trigger warnings, there are a ton of kinks, so please make sure you check them before you decide to read this one. But it's a quick, fast-paced read, obviously. The audiobook is narrated by one of my favorite male audiobook narrators, which is the reason why I wanted to pick it up. My friend Karina told me that he was doing the narration, and I was like, well, then I need to read it. And then we ended up really enjoying it and reading the second book, which is a Christmas smutty novella following the same characters. Anyways, it's very interesting. Like I said, very, very, very dark, very, very unhinged. So know that going in. I didn't go in there for like the best book of all time. I just went in there for a fun time, and I did have a fun time. So I would highly recommend it if you're looking for something during the Halloween season, and it's short and quick. Totally, totally recommend. Also, just a disclaimer, if you guys hear crying in the background, my husband is trying to put the baby down for a nap, so I apologize. I have 4 physical books that I found very surprising this year, so let's just quickly go through them. The first one being The Inheritance of Arquita Divinia. I had never read anything by this author in the past, but this just didn't seem like a book that I thought that I was really going to love. Guess is it fantasy? Yes, but it's a little bit more magical realism than it is fantasy, and I just wasn't super drawn in by the story. But once I read it, I just absolutely fell in love with the writing and the storytelling that Zorita Cordova ended up putting together in this book. It's a very interesting novel that I found very lyrically written. It basically follows a matriarch, Arquita Divinia, who invites her family to her home to collect their inheritance because she knows that she's about to pass on. But when her family gets there, she turns into a tree, and she ends up bestowing magical powers on a few of the core family members, and they have a flower growing out of them. But dark and dangerous things from Arquita's past start to hunt down the other living counterparts of this family, and they go on a journey to figure out what Orchid Divinia's past was and how it led to this dangerous entity. It's very interesting. It's very well done, well written, and just absolutely enthralling to read. I love the writing, and I was just so blown away by the story. Up next, we're going to talk about the Beast of Beasts, the Chunker of Chunkers, and that is Priory of the Orange Tree. I am not a big adult fantasy girly. I don't read a ton of adult fantasy. You know, I'm trying. I'm branching out. I'm pushing myself out of my comfort zone, but this is not definitely a book I never thought that I would read anytime soon. It ended up coming up on a TBR bingo. That's one of my favorite instances of TBR bingo ever because I didn't mean to pull it, but I did. And I ended up reading it that month. I buddy read it with my friend Karina, and we struggled through it. Honestly, I think we read it for almost a full month, and it took us so long to get through it, but I was honestly surprised that I actually really enjoyed it. I didn't give it a full 5 stars. I think that there were some things about this book that weren't to my taste, but being as I don't read a ton of adult fantasy, I don't read books that are usually this thick, I was so surprised that I really enjoyed it. The world building, the characters were really fun to follow, and I just had a great time with it, even though it took me a long time, so I'm really glad that I read it. And don't ask me what the synopsis of this book is because I won't be able to tell you. Up next, we're going to talk about Glass Sword by Victoria Aveyard, and the reason I'm adding this one in here is because I really didn't enjoy book 1 in this series. But for some reason, I decided, let me read book 2. And I actually was blown away by book 2 and how much I enjoyed it. I think I ended up giving the first book 2.5, but I bumped it up to 3 on Goodreads. And then I ended up giving this one a 4-star. I really thought that it was such a cool turn on the way that things ended in book 1, I mean. I don't know where my brain just went. But it was a really cool turn on book 1. And I really liked where the character went and the amount of trauma and grief that is touched upon in the story, and how the character Mare is really working through a lot of the shit that she has gone through in the first book and how to come out on top of that. It was just really well done. There was definitely a scene in here that really hurt my heart, and I'm very intrigued to pick up book 3 in the series and hopefully finish it out sometime this year. And the last surprising book we're going to talk about before we get into my favorites of the year list, and that is The Devil Makes 3 by Tori Bovolino. This one has a really low Goodreads rating, so I wasn't expecting to absolutely love it the way that I did. This is the first real true dark academia book that I've ever read, and I just absolutely fell in love with the story. It follows a girl who works in this library, and she ends up unleashing a devil from one of the books, and there's a hate to love romance going on, but the two characters have to figure out a way to put this devil back in the books before it absolutely ruins their life. So it was very dark, it was very creepy, very eerie, perfect book to read around the spooky season, but the dark academia vibes in here, the writing was very beautiful, everything about the way that the story unfolded was just absolutely beautiful and totally blew my mind, and just wasn't anything of what I was expecting, and I had so much fun with it. Is it the best book I've read ever? No, but the reading experience was just so enjoyable that I couldn't help but be surprised by it. Okay, those are all of my surprising books. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of this video, the best books of 2022. I'm gonna start off with the obvious one for me. Like I said, these are not in any particular order. I just couldn't do it this year. But you guys all know this was gonna end up on this list, so I figured I would talk about it first, and that is House of Sky and Breath by Sarah J. Maas. I loved the sequel of this book. I know there are a lot of people out there that didn't like it, didn't like the ending, thought it was too long, whatever. You can not like it, that's fine. I totally am okay with your opinion, but this is my opinion and I loved it. I have an entire video of me rereading the first book and then reading this one, and I just had such an amazing time. I loved being back with these characters, learning a little bit more about the male perspectives in this story. Rune is one of my favorite characters of all time. I just think that he is just so enthralling to follow, and I loved his storyline in here, and the continuation of Bryce and Hunt's story was just chef's kiss, and the ending absolutely mind-blowing. I'm not going to explain the synopsis of the first book. I feel like it's a very popular fantasy novel. I'm not going to go into too much, but just know the first book in the series is still my favorite of the two. I absolutely love House of Earth and Blood. It still holds the top spot as my favorite book of all time, but this one comes in close second. I love this book so much, and I'm so glad we got the sequel this year. All right, the next one on my stack was Heatwave by TJ Klune. As you guys know, I absolutely adore TJ Klune, and honestly, I could have added this entire series into this video, but if I had to pick one, this would be my favorite. I absolutely loved the conclusion of this series. I thought that it was so beautifully well done. I love the way that TJ Klune wraps up his stories, and it really does do these characters justice. We did an interview with TJ Klune earlier this year for Season-a-thon, and he talked about how queer individuals oftentimes don't get a happy ending. And so for his stories, it may be a spoiler, do with that what you will, but he says that all of his stories, he loves giving his queer characters happy endings because it's what they so rightfully deserve and what they have been kept from for a very long time. And so I love the way that their story ended and how these characters wrapped up and the arc that they took from book 1 to the end of the series and how much growth and change happened between all of them. There was also some really important conversations that happened in the story that just really touched and warmed my heart. And I loved it. I cried at the end of this book. I loved it so much. I read it for the 24-hour readathon that I did a few months ago, and I just had so much fun. But what I should say is, if you don't know what the first book is about, it's called The Extraordinaries. The first book, it follows an ADHD kid named Nick who is absolutely in love with superheroes, and this world has two superheroes that he just absolutely loves to write about. One of them in particular he has a huge crush on, and you follow another boy that he is his best friend, and it's the relationship between the two of them as it blooms and blossoms into a male-male romance. You also have some lesbian couples in here. You have tons of representation. It's so fantastic. But superheroes, ADHD kid, wonderful story, fantastic, and I absolutely love TJ Klune, and this book is absolutely no exception. Up next, we're jumping into romance territory, and we have All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. Honestly, am I surprised? No, I have loved everything Mariana has written that I have read so far. I've now read 3 of her books, and all of them are 5 out of 5 stars. This one follows Aurora, and she is going back to the small town where she was raised with her mother before her mother disappeared, and she's going back because she's had a falling out with some people in her past, and she wants a safe place to land, and she also wants to do the hikes that her mother used to do before she went missing on one of those trails. She ends up in this small town, and she needs a place to stay, so she decides to rent an Airbnb, only to find out that the garage Airbnb that was rented by the son of the man that owns the space, and he didn't know that his son was trying to rent it, and he is very begrudgingly giving this space to Aurora. His name is Rhodes, and they end up having a relationship. He's a very, very grumpy guy. He doesn't really want Aurora around, but she somehow snakes her way into their life and their family, and it's just so wholesome. I love their relationship so much, and seeing this small town romance with this grumpy sunshine trope, which is everything that I could have wanted and more. Mariana just does slow burn like nobody else can do. Honestly, it's perfect. Everything is just so thoughtfully placed, and the books may be long, but they don't feel like it. They're so quick and easy to read, and they're just so much fun. So I had a great time with this one, and so glad that I read another Mariana this year. Changing up the vibes, I have Final Gambit by Jennifer Lynn Barnes, the last and final book in the Inheritance Games trilogy, and holy shit, was this good. I don't read a lot of mystery thrillers, and if I do, I honestly end up enjoying YA ones a little bit more, maybe because they're more fast-paced and a little bit more chaotic and crazy, and that's something that I tend to like. I don't reach for a ton of YA, but I'm so glad that I ended up reaching for this series because it is just so much fun. It follows Avery, who gets a letter from a mysterious man saying that she needs to come to this estate and collect her inheritance. When she gets there, she realizes that she has inherited millions and millions of dollars, as well as this entire estate, charities, cars, all of this crazy stuff, and she doesn't even know the man that decided to give her this inheritance. Then you follow them. It's Avery and the 3 brothers who are the grandsons of the man who gave the inheritance, as they try to figure out why Avery was chosen, what this big grand game is that he was trying to play, and what it all leads to. And the conclusion was absolutely fantastic. I had so much fun. I didn't guess a single thing along the way, maybe little things here and there, but the final reveal was just nothing that I expected it to be, and I just had so much fun with the series, so I had to add it to my favorites of the year list. Up next, we have another romance, and that is Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. This is another small town, grumpy sunshine romance that I just had an absolute blast with. I cannot wait for the book 2 in this series, which follows the main character, I want to make sure I don't get his name wrong, because I'm thinking of 2 different names. Knox is the main character in this book, and Nash, his brother, is the main character of the next book, and I'm so excited about it. But basically, this follows Naomi, who is a runaway bride who ends up in this small town called Knockamount because her twin sister calls her telling her that she needs help. And she is running away from her wedding anyway, so she runs to her sister, only to find out that her sister is not the woman you want to be around. She ends up stealing Naomi's car, her belongings, and cash, and leaving her alone with her young daughter. Her name is Waylay, and now Naomi is basically a single parent in a town that she doesn't know anything about, with absolutely nothing to her name. And it's the relationship between Knox, who is the basically the town grump. He is known for taking care of a lot of people in the town and being everybody's shoulder to lean on, and he ends up doing that for Naomi as well, and they create a very begrudging relationship, and it's just wonderful. They don't like each other in the beginning, but they find beautiful things to love about each other in the end. It does also involve some fake dating, but for me, the fake dating didn't feel fake. It was very raw and real and authentic, and I just had such a good time with it, so I'm so glad that I read it, and I cannot wait to read more Lucy Score in the future. Alright, up next, I'm going to talk about 2 books by the same author. I don't own one, but I do own the other, and I'm so excited because I didn't know I was going to own this, but it came in one of my Mystic boxes, and I am pumped. The first one I'm going to talk about is Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman. This is a dark romance. Please know that before you even get excited about this book. It's super dark. It follows a girl who is at her sister's birthday party. They are out at a bar, and she sees out later than her sister and her sister's fiance. She ends up not being able to get home, call a cab, something goes wrong, and she needs to ask her sister's fiance to come pick her up. He begrudgingly does so. They are kind of like enemies. They don't love each other at all. They are constantly bickering and fighting. So he begrudgingly picks her up. On the way home, they get kidnapped, and they are forced to stay in captivity with each other for 3 weeks, while this person does terrible things to them and makes them do terrible things to each other, and it's the romance between the 2 of them. Granted, this is a forbidden romance. Obviously, it's her sister's fiance, but they come back from this terrible place that they've been in, and these are the only 2 people they know how to lean on, because these 2 people only know what it's like to go through what they went through. And it's such a dark romance, but it was so rewarding and so fulfilling, and it was absolutely beautiful. I loved this book so much. It made me cry. It made me feel. The characters just felt so real and raw, and by the end of the story, seeing all the shit they had to go through to get to where they ended up in the end was just so gratifying, and I loved it so much. So if you haven't read this one and you think you can get through those crazy trigger warnings, I highly recommend it, but please know the things that happen on page, so if you're not okay with that, I would steer clear, but if you can make it through it, so worth it. That being said, the other book that I read by this author this year ended up on this list, and that is The Wrong Heart by Jennifer Hartman. This one was so good. This one follows Melody, and she recently lost her husband, the love of her life, in an accident, and his heart gets donated to somebody else, and she ends up being able to communicate with the person that got her heart via anonymous emails, and she ends up communicating with that person back and forth. It begins this correspondence of a person that she really comes to know and trust. At the same time, she is at a suicide prevention group, and she meets a man named Parker. Parker is a grump to the utmost degree. He really doesn't want anything to do with life or people, and Melody just comes into his life and cracks his hard exterior. He is definitely going through a lot. He has a lot of trauma from his past that keeps him from being a person that you want to be around, honestly, but the 2 of them strike up a connection only to find out that the person that they are communicating with is each other. They just don't know it yet, and so you have that duality between the emails that they're sending each other, but also this relationship that's forming in person, in real life, and you have this really hard and harrowing read that just takes a lot out of you, but it's just, again, so rewarding by the end. These characters go through so much to be with each other, and it was just so beautifully well done. Again, keep in mind this has a ton of trigger warnings. It's very dark. There is attempted suicide as well as suicide on page, so just make sure that you know that going in, but it was absolutely beautiful, so well done. I absolutely love her writing. I have another book on my shelf that I absolutely have to read now because it's just so good, and I highly recommend it if you haven't already given Jennifer Hartman a try. Alright, let's talk about Tate James in one fell swoop, because you all know she had to end up on this list because she's a queen and I absolutely love her. So the first series that I read this year that I absolutely fell in love with was the Hades series, and this is a reverse harem with 3 men, 1 woman, and it follows the events after the Madison Kate series by Tate James, which I absolutely love and adore. It ended up in my favorites of last year, so are we surprised? No. Hades is a badass character. She takes no shit. She is not afraid to get what she wants by any means necessary. If that means killing, then so be it. If that means torture, then so be it. She is not afraid to do anything. She kind of runs this town, actually. So I had a great time with this. The characters were just so much fun. You have a friends to lovers romance, you have an age gap romance, and then you have a grumpy sunshine romance definitely happening in this. And all of the men definitely don't necessarily want this reverse harem situation that they have going on, but they just can't help it. They love Hades so much, and they all sacrifice so much to be with each other, and it's just amazing. Again, all these books have terrible cliffhangers, so keep that in mind if you're deciding to go into the series. Also keep in mind, I would definitely say the series is way more dark than the Madison Kate series, and Madison Kate is dark to begin with. So keep that in mind before you go in, but fantastic. Such a good series. Love it so much, and I cannot wait to do a reread. Speaking of Tate James, we're going to talk about another book set in the Shadow Grove world. This does follow the events after the Hades series, but you could read this one out of order if you wanted to. This is the Guild series, the first one being Honey Trap. This one follows Danny, and oh man, I'm gonna forget his name. It's been a long time since I've read this one. His name is Leon. My goodness, it took me a while to figure that out. Danny and Leon, they are both part of the Guild, which is a mercenary group, basically killers for hire. And Danny ends up falling into a precarious situation while she's on a job. Leon is kind of obsessed with Danny, has been for a while, and really wants a relationship with her and is willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that that relationship happens. But when she falls into this job and ends up in a precarious situation, she ends up falling for one of her marks, and it becomes a why choose romance between the two of them. So it's 2 guys, 1 girl. It's very, very dark. I think this one might be actually the darkest that she's written so far, just because you are dealing with a mercenary group, people killing a lot of people. It's kind of crazy, but it's so good. Danny as a character is so multifaceted. She has a lot of duality in her personality and the way that she interacts with the people in her life, and I just find it absolutely so compelling. I love this book so much. This is a trilogy instead of a quartet from this author, and again, the cliffhanger's absolutely wild, so be ready for that, but highly, highly recommend anything by Tate James, but this series is very, very good. Let's move away from the dark romance and go into something light and fluffy. Let's talk about Book Lovers by Emily Henry. Emily Henry has ended up in my favorites list for the last 3 years, and I absolutely love almost everything she writes. People We Meet on Vacation is probably my least favorite. Romance, I haven't read anything outside of her romance, so I can't say I love everything that she writes because I haven't read anything else but her romance, but I'm very excited that I loved this one. A lot of people had mixed reviews on this book. I personally was one that I absolutely loved. I'm just so glad that I read it. This one follows Nora, who is definitely known as like the hard person to love. She is very structured. She's very strict with her life. She is a no shit taker. And she definitely knows that. She knows that she's not the girl that people tend to choose. And she has a work rivalry with this man. Why can't I think of his name? Charlie. This man named Charlie. They both work in the publishing industry. And when Nora's sister convinces her to go to this small town, they end up running into each other and creating a relationship from there. This one does have a lot of familial problems going out throughout the book, and it takes up a good portion of the book, so if you don't love that, I don't think that you'll love this book. But I personally really love when Emily Henry integrates real life problems with her romances. I found Nora and Charlie to be such a compelling characters to follow, such a compelling couple to follow, and I just loved their relationship. I found that it was really beautiful to watch a woman that didn't have to give up everything about who she was in order to fall in love with the man. And same thing for Charlie. He didn't give up everything about who he was in order to fall in love with Nora. And the two of them just work so perfectly together. They're both grumpy. They both have issues. And I just loved everything that played out in this and how they worked through what they had to work through in order to be together. It was great. I loved it. So happy that I love Emily Henry, and I cannot wait for her new release this year. Let's talk about a book that is such a hard read, but I loved it. I loved it so much, and that is Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. Oh my god. This is one of the hardest books that I have ever read in my entire life. The first half of this book, I'm telling you, the first half of this book follows an abusive relationship. So please, please, please keep that in mind before you go into this. I'm talking explicit on-page content of sexual and physical abuse by her husband. So just keep that in mind before you go into this. But oh my god, it's beautiful. This one follows, man, I'm not gonna remember their names. I should, because I've read the second book and it talks about them too. August and Iris. Iris is married to the golden boy of basketball, and she ends up finding out that he's not so golden to begin with. He definitely has a mean streak, and he ends up being a very abusive person to her after the birth of her daughter. And she doesn't really know how to get out. She is terrified and scared, and she ends up running into another basketball player. His name is August, and they have an instant connection, an instant spark, but she is not a cheater, so she doesn't do anything with him. And Iris knows that her husband and August have a tumultuous past. They are not friends, they are enemies, in fact, and that definitely creates a big hurdle in their relationship. But August is absolutely infatuated with Iris and wants nothing more than to make her his. And it is the relationship between the two of them. There is some cheating in this book, so keep that in mind, but obviously her husband is terrible to her and she's looking for a place to run to when she needs help, and she ends up in August's arms, and it's just so beautifully written. There is a scene in here that I have reread multiple times because I don't even know. It just speaks to my soul. I have watched somebody that I really love go through an abusive relationship, and I know how hard it is to get out. So seeing books that portray it so beautifully well done is beautiful, but I love the relationship together, and I love how much they fought through to get to where they are. There's a common theme in the books that I love is seeing couples struggle to get to where they need to be in the end, but making it feel so worth it, and this definitely was. So I'm so glad that I read it, and I will definitely read more Kennedy Ryan in the future. Up next, we have Wicked Souls by Katie Wismer. This is the second book? Yes, the second book in the Marionette series. I read the first book last year and loved it. It was on my favorites of the year list, and this is no exception. This is a wonderful sequel, and I just had so much fun with it. It definitely gets spicier as the series goes on, and I just have such a fun time with these characters and this world. Basically, you follow Valerie Darkmoor in the first book, and she is on her way to becoming a marionette. She is just getting ready to start her trials to become a marionette, and a marionette is a league of witches that are tasked with keeping the vampire species alive and well. But when things start happening around the same time as her trials for the marionette, she realizes that her trials might not just be in danger, but also her life. So you also follow her as she becomes bonded and becomes entangled with a vampire prince. His name is Reed, and oh, it's just so hot and sexy and wonderful, and the series really spins off from there. It's just so intriguing and fun and fast-paced, and so many secrets and lies and craziness happening, and I'm just having so much fun with the series. The third book just recently came out, and I cannot wait to read it. I do have the audiobook, so hopefully I can read that very soon, but I love book 2, and I cannot wait to read the rest of the series. Alright, it had to happen. Of course, Colleen Hoover ended up on this list as well, and that is Reminders of Him. This book really just did something to my soul. This one follows Kenna. I was going to say McKenna, but that's not right. Kenna, as she's getting out of prison after years of being in, and she is hoping to reconnect with her daughter that she had while she was in prison. And you follow her as you realize that the family that her daughter is with wants nothing to do with her being a parent. It's the grandparents that are now taking care of her daughter, and she ends up meeting Heath. Is that his name? Ledger. I was close. Heath Ledger. She ends up meeting Ledger in a bar, only to find out later that Ledger was actually connected to the father of her baby. And he didn't know that when they started spending time together, but now that he does, he wants nothing to do with Kenna either, and it's their relationship. This definitely has a lot more life stuff going on than it does romance, but I just found it so beautiful. I loved everything that happened in this book, and the characters just went through absolutely so much, and I loved it. I thought that it was so heartwarming and beautiful, but also sad and heart-wrenching, and the letters that were in here were just so beautiful, and I always love when I figure out what Colleen Hoover's titles mean, and this one was especially impactful to me, so I really loved it, and I'm so glad that I read it, and it's definitely a favorite of mine from her, hands down. Alright, we're on to our second to last book on this list, and that is Brothersong by TJ Klune. 2 TJ Klunes in this series, but we did complete the series in January of 2022, so I absolutely had to add this in. I absolutely love this series so much. If you don't know what the Green Key series is, the first book is Wolfsong, and it follows Ox and Joe, and it is a werewolf romance, and oh my god, it's so beautiful. Ox and Joe are best friends before they ever become a romantic relationship, and you just follow this really beautiful found family group filled with everything that you could want. It's just, I don't even know how to explain this series without getting emotional. It's sad, it's beautiful. I didn't even give you a proper synopsis. Basically, all I went in knowing was gay werewolves, and I feel like that's the only thing that you should know going into the story. It is so beautiful. It has so many twists and turns. There's so many heart-wrenching and absolutely sad scenes, but also some beautiful, heartwarming, absolutely wonderful scenes as well. Each book follows a different character, but follows an overarching story plot over all 4 books, as well as the short little novellas that are in between, and they are just everything that I could want and more. This one follows Carter, and his love interest, one that you kind of learn about a little bit more as the series continues, so I will not divulge, but oh my god, it's amazing, it's beautiful, it's everything I could have wanted and more, and I'm so glad that I finally finished out the series. The fourth one happens to be my favorite, so I'm so glad that I loved it. Alright, let's talk about my last and final book on my best books of 2022, and that is The Heart Principle by Helen Huang. I loved this book so much. And again, this is another one of those books that deals with a lot of life stuff and less of the romance, but I just found this book to be so compelling. So this book follows Anna and Kwan, and Anna is in a very interesting situation. She has had this boyfriend for quite some time. She doesn't really absolutely love this relationship, but she has been committed to this man for so long, and he finally comes to her and says that he wants to open up their relationship because he wants to see if there's other things out there that could be better for him before he settles down and decides to propose. And Anna is kind of like, what the hell? Okay, if you were gonna have an open relationship and be with somebody else, then so am I. So she goes on a dating app and finds a man that is willing to have a one-night stand with her. Kwan happens to be that man, and you did meet Kwan in the first book, The Kiss Quotient. This is the third book in the series. And he has a very interesting backstory, one that I won't divulge because I think you learn about it in book 2, but he's really struggling with self-confidence and being sexual with somebody, and so after they try to have their first night stand, which goes awry, they try to have one night stand after one night stand after one night stand. That just doesn't happen the way that they want it to, and they end up having this really beautiful relationship between the two of them that ends up becoming of those failed one night stands. And it's just a really beautiful relationship to watch between the two of them. But during that time, Anna finds out that she's autistic, and she is trying to work through this newfound diagnosis, but also at the same time, her father is going through a really terrible health struggle, and she has become one of the sole caretakers of her father. And so you really follow that aspect of the story quite a bit. So if that's not something you want to read about, I don't recommend picking this book up because it does take up a good portion of the story. But you follow the relationship as they kind of hold each other up in their dark times. And for me, what I love about the story is it felt very real and raw to what it would be like to be with this person in real life. And I find a lot of the romances that I read, sometimes they're really unrealistic and hard to get behind, but this one just felt so real because it really could happen to anybody. They would have to go through this, and they would have to find a partner that was willing to stand by them while they were going through these hard times. And these characters really get more of a happy for now, not really a happily ever after. And usually I wouldn't love that, but the way that this book ended off and the way that it made me feel so connected to these characters, it was just everything that I could have wanted and asked for in this book and more. So I absolutely love this one. I still need to read the second book in the series, but I loved it so much, and I'm so glad that I finally read this one. Alright, those are all of the books that I read this year that I absolutely loved, and some books that really surprised me. I would love to know down below if you read any of these books and what you thought of them. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments, as well as what books ended up on your favorites of the year list. I will be also sharing my worst books of the year, so stay tuned for that. But that is the end of this video. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give it a big old thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe before you leave. And of course, leave any comments, questions, suggestions in the comment section below. And I will see you in the next video. Bye. Baby, turn it down like a sweet and ready. Boys, keep it nice and steady.